Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'll be doing my analysis of who I think Kamala Harris should choose as her vice presidential nominee, as well as who I expect her to pick, as the announcement should be here within the next few days. I've heard reports it could be within the next 72 hours even. So we're going to talk about it today. Now, first, I do want to say I was away for the past week and a half, so I was not able to post. My sincere apologies for that. I picked a terrible, terrible week to not be able to record because so much stuff happened. I literally haven't recorded a video since Kamala Harris became the presumptive nominee for the Democratic Party. So my apologies. I did write 2 articles. You can find them on my Substack linked in the description. But with that being said, I will stop talking about that and I will move forward here. And I intend to be posting a lot more to make up for these next few days since I'm a lot less busy. So really, to me, there's 3 candidates who still have a chance of being Kamala Harris as vice president. There is Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, and Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. So there are some other candidates on this list. Again, you can kind of see, some other people here. Mark Kelly hasn't been eliminated yet. Pete Buttigieg still on the list. Kamala Harris, I don't think will be chosen as her own vice president. Sherrod Brown could be on the list, but again, he is running for Senate this year. Joe Manchin, Amy Klobuchar, no. Gavin Newsom would obviously have many problems. J.B. Pritzker has actually not been eliminated from the list yet, but I'd highly doubt that she will pick him. Gretchen Whitmer's also not been eliminated from the list yet, although she herself has actually indicated she's not interested. And then you really get into some, super long shots here. Roy Cooper was actually in the top 5 at a certain point, but he himself actually tweeted and made a statement saying he's not going to be the VP. And we have reports he's likely to run for Senate in 2026 or 2028. So that could be a good thing for Democrats because they haven't won a Senate seat in North Carolina since 2008. And Cooper, as the relatively popular Democratic governor, would have a good chance of flipping a seat blue. But really, it's going to be one of these 3. And the reason I'm kind of knocking out Kelly and Buttigieg here is twofold. So in terms of Kelly, Harris has indicated that she wants someone who has executive experience. And Mark Kelly was a political newcomer until 2020 when he won a Senate seat. And he's, been a senator who's relatively well known for the Democrats, but he's not, he hasn't ever been in an executive position. He's been a legislator. So he's kind of, to me, that's a pretty clear indication that he's not going to be picked. He also has problems with labor unions urging Harris to not pick him. And then Pete Buttigieg, obviously, does have executive experience, but he's very young and not as much as I think Kamala Harris would like. He also just, to be completely honest, I don't think that there's really an argument for Pete that could be made for someone else. So really, it's going to be one of the 3 governors at the top of the list. And they all make sense because they all are governors. They all have, Walz and Beshear have served 2 terms or in the process of serving 2 terms. Shapiro's new, but he was the attorney general of the state for 8 years. So they all have experience. And I'm going to talk with them. I'm going to grade them. And at the end of the video, I'll tell you who I expect Harris to pick. So we'll start with Andy Beshear here. Now, Andy Beshear is the governor of Kentucky, as I mentioned. And he most recently won last year. He beat Dan Cameron, who, a lot of people forget this, but Dan Cameron was a good candidate. He was the attorney general of the state. And, early on, a lot of people thought he was going to win, myself included. Now, by the time it, became summer and fall of 2023, the consensus had kind of shifted in favor of Beshear. I predicted Beshear would win by, I think, 3.5 on election day. He won by 5. So, winning wasn't shocking, but it was still impressive because, again, he's a Democrat in Kentucky. And when you look at the other results, like the attorney general race, Republicans won by 16. They won the treasurer, then the secretary of state race by 21. Then you go to the other down ballot races. They won agricultural commissioner, auditor, and treasurer, all by double digits. So Beshear was the only Democrat to win statewide in Kentucky. And, since 2015, I believe he's actually been the only Democrat to win statewide because he was the former attorney general of the state. And now he's the governor who's been elected twice. So he's popular here. He's consistently has high approval ratings. And he did really well with Republicans in his run for re-election. So in Kentucky, he definitely has appeal. And again, the argument for Beshear is that he doesn't divide the party. He's a very normal Democrat. And, again, for being the governor of Kentucky, he's not that conservative. He's not like a Joe Manchin type of Democrat where he's very, socially conservative and kind of postures in that way. He's a pretty normal Democrat, and he's actually been pretty liberal, I'd say, as governor of Kentucky, more so than governors in deeply blue states. So he wouldn't divide the party. And he also, I think, is a pretty good speaker. He's not, I wouldn't call him super charismatic, but he's good. I think he's less awkward than J.D. Vance for what it's worth. And also, again, the argument is that, as governor of Kentucky, he knows how to appeal to rural voters, and he really knows how to win in areas that Democrats don't normally win. And that could be an area of strength for Kamala Harris in, say, the Rust Belt or even parts of the South. And that's what they've been doing with Bashir. They've been sending him to, Forsyth County, Georgia, which voted for Trump by almost 40 points last time. It's north of Atlanta. It's a conservative exurb. And he, I think, went to Oklahoma City even. So they've been sending him to pretty conservative areas. And I think that's what the appeal of Bashir is. Now, I'm actually I'm actually a believer, despite all this, that Bashir is kind of overvalued as a pick. If you read my article, you'll know why, but I ranked him 5th out of the 9 choices we had at that point in time. It's now been narrowed down to the top 3. But the reason I ranked him 5 is because he doesn't really have specific appeal to a swing state. Kentucky, if Kamala Harris picked Bashir, I think Kentucky would swing blue by a little bit. I think he'd do marginally better for her there than if she picked, say, Shapiro or Walz. But once again, in this day and age, vice presidents tend to really only maximize their appeal in their own states. And I don't think that Bashir would be a negative, say, in like Michigan or Wisconsin, but I don't think he'd be that much of a positive either because, again, the average, working class voter that Kamala Harris is trying to target doesn't really have a strong opinion on Bashir, right? Like they're not lining up and being like, oh, we really want Bashir right now because he's the governor of another state and he's kept a relatively low profile. So he wouldn't hurt her, but I don't think that there's much to gain. And once again, Bashir, as the governor of a relatively red state, I think is valued because of that rural experience he has. But Kentucky's not like a super Rust Belt working class state like Michigan or Wisconsin or to an extent Pennsylvania. And those are the states Kamala Harris really needs to win. It doesn't do her any good if she does 2 points better in Indiana or 3 points better in Tennessee or 4 points better in Kentucky. What matters is winning Michigan, winning Wisconsin, winning Pennsylvania. And so Bashir would be a fine pick. I definitely wouldn't, if I'm Kamala Harris, I wouldn't make it, but it wouldn't hurt her campaign either. But to me, he's the worst person left in the running. So kind of in the middle here, my second place pick goes to Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Now, Tim Walz has kind of become the favorite of a lot of progressive Democrats because he's been a pretty progressive governor of Minnesota. He passed the free lunch bill, guaranteeing that all students will have access to, I believe, both breakfast and lunch in public schools from K through 12. So, he has some accomplishments he can kind of tout in a progressive way. And again, he's popular in Minnesota. I wouldn't say he's like that impressive a performer the way that Bashir or Shapiro are, but he's done well, and he ran even with Biden in a redder year, so he's definitely strong, I'd say, electorally. And the case for him is that he has a good story. He served in the U.S. I think the Minnesota National Guard or the U.S. National Guard, and he was a football coach, and he was also a teacher. So he's probably like the most down to earth guy on this list. I believe both Andy Bashir and Josh Shapiro were kind of born into privilege. Actually, Andy Bashir was the son of a governor of Kentucky, but Bashir was definitely born into privilege. But Walz is not like that, and I think he has the best story out of any of these 3 people. Again, for however that much that matters, I think he's a good communicator. He kind of started the branding of Republicans as weird, right? Like he said, these guys are weird, and Democrats kind of ran with that. It remains to be seen how effective that will be. I think they should be cautious with calling Republicans weird because, again, you don't want to insult your opponents. But regardless, thus far it's been, I'd say, effective. And so, to me, Tim Walz is a good pick. He's from the Midwest. Minnesota's not really a swing state, but it still helps to win it. Realistically, if Kamala Harris loses Minnesota, she's probably already lost Michigan and Wisconsin. But, it definitely helps. And because he's more Midwestern than, say, Andy Bashir, I think he would have a bit more impact in Wisconsin or Michigan, but not a ton. And so that's why I think he's a bit better of a pick. But again, his downside is that he doesn't really come from a swing state, and he doesn't necessarily balance the ticket ideologically. Bashir is a progressive Democrat, but he's not really been able to govern that way because he governs in Kentucky, right? Tim Walz has been a very progressive governor even this past year and a half because Democrats won the legislature back in 2022, and he's been able to pass a lot of progressive legislation. And so Trump and Vance have already tried to brand Kamala Harris as this left-wing candidate who's super out of touch with the average American. And I don't think Tim Walz would kind of quell those fears because Tim Walz is a progressive himself. He's in the same ideological camp as Harris, if not a bit more left. So he's a good pick. I think he does a bit more to help than Bashir, but to me, he's clearly not as good as the best pick on this list, which, is Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, who's currently the predicted betting favorite. And so we'll talk about Shapiro for a little bit here. He won by 15 points in his race for governor. Granted, that was against a very bad GOP opponent who Republicans gave up on. And, he's but aside from that, he's also pretty impressive. In 2016, he won the AG race in the state by, I think, 5 points. He won by a similar amount in 2020. So he's outran both Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden by considerable amounts both times. And Shapiro is the most moderate person on this list, I would say. He has some conservative positions, specifically on school vouchers, but that isn't an issue that's, I think, high enough in salience to really divide the party. The main argument against Shapiro was that he's too, moderate, and that Democrats, if they want to energize the base the way Kamala Harris has been doing for the past 2 weeks, is to keep, kind of appeasing and appealing, Gen Z and the progressive base, the party that was pretty disaffected with Joe Biden. But again, Josh Shapiro, is more moderate. So once again, the argument against him is that he wouldn't actually energize that base. But I don't really think that's true. I think that the argument against Shapiro is pretty online, and even Shapiro's even received endorsements from progressive Democrats, like I believe it's Cenk Uygur endorsed him, or he wrote an article arguing that Shapiro is the progressive choice, and Shapiro definitely helps with the Electoral College because he's from Pennsylvania. We'll get into it for a second, but again, people who say Shapiro would hurt Harris in Michigan or Wisconsin with progressive voters, even if he does, I have a hard time imagining there's like tens or hundreds of thousands of young Democrats in those two states that are like, oh, I was going to vote for Kamala Harris, but now she chose this guy as her VP, so I'm going to stay home. To whatever extent that exists, it's tiny, and unless Michigan was decided by like 0.1%, I don't think that would happen. And just in general, I'm kind of under the impression that, like I said, most of that anti-Shapiro argument is online. I think in real life he's very popular, and in Pennsylvania he's very popular. His approved ratings are above 60% consistently. He won by 15 points in the governor race in 2022, and he's been able to win over Republicans in past elections, kind of to the extent Beshear has. And I think on a presidential level, running alongside Kamala Harris would be able to make that case. I think he's the most charismatic person on this list. I think he's the best speaker, and he's also a good debater. Which, to be fair, both I think Beshear and Walz are, but Shapiro is a very good speaker, I'd say. And he quite frankly, the reason I think that he's the best pick for Harris is because he comes from a swing state, right? Like Kentucky and Minnesota aren't going to likely flip. Kentucky obviously is deep red. Minnesota's a lighter shade of blue, but at this point, I don't really think Trump's going to win it. Pennsylvania is a toss-up. Pennsylvania, this state is as close as it gets. It's far and away the most important state. And and if you look at how these campaigns are spending money, right now in Pennsylvania, it's by far the most expensive state to buy advertising in, and it's pretty evenly split. I think Team Harris has spent, or Democrats have spent $102 million in the state since March, and Trump has spent $109 million in the state. So it's very close. It's the most expensive state. And realistically, Harris can't win the presidency without it, because if she loses Pennsylvania, she has to sweep all the other swing states. And if she loses Pennsylvania, I don't think she's going to be able to do that. Now, if she wins Pennsylvania, that really cuts off a big path for Trump. She can still lose while winning Pennsylvania, but it's a lot harder, because once she wins Pennsylvania, all she really has to do is hold on to Wisconsin and Michigan. And at that point, you're generally in a pretty good position. So Shapiro's the best pick for that reason, really just because Pennsylvania, he's popular there. He was 3-0 in statewide elections there. And he's also a good speaker. I genuinely don't believe that he would really alienate progressive voters, because I think he's a good speaker. I think as a governor, aside from the vouchers thing, he's been a pretty normal Democrat. And especially when you're running against someone like J.D. Vance as for vice president, Donald Trump for president, I really think progressive voters are going to come home for Kamala Harris in a way they wouldn't have come home for Joe Biden. So Shapiro's the best pick, I think, by a good amount. Walz and Beshear wouldn't be disasters, but I think it would be a big missed opportunity if Harris did not pick Josh Shapiro as her VP. So that's my opinion. I don't work for the Harris campaign. I don't have any say at all with who she picks, but who do I think she's going to pick? So again, if you look at the betting odds, Kamala Harris, VP choice, Shapiro at 74 cents. He's the far and away the favorite. Tim Walz, distant second. Andy Beshear, distant third. It's this pretty clear gap between all of these candidates. But I got to say, I agree with with essentially what Vegas is saying. I don't actually love political betting. I'm not a huge fan of it. I've actually never done it before. But if I were to bet, I'd still bet Shapiro. He's, again, a very, high-profile Democrat. Kamala Harris knows he's from a swing state. Kamala Harris knows the state that she has to win. And all reports indicate that Shapiro's camp actually thinks he's going to be the pick. We have, on good authority that, Josh Shapiro's team is preparing for him to be announced VP come Monday or Tuesday. And so that's why I'm expecting it to be him. Now, would I be shocked if it's Tim Walz or Andy Bashir? No, I wouldn't be shocked. I'd be shocked if it were Pete Buttigieg. But really, what we're looking at here is all signs point to Shapiro being the VP. He's the best pick. It all makes a lot of sense. And I think that if she were to pick Shapiro, she would be favored in Pennsylvania. Wouldn't be a guarantee at all, but I think I would move that state towards her in my ratings. And I'll do my updated prediction for Kamala Harris versus Trump tomorrow, and you will see that before the VP picks announced, and then I'll do a prediction after the VP picks announced, whether it's Walz, Bashir, or Shapiro. So let me know who you want her to pick. Let me know who you think that she's going to pick, and I'll see you all tomorrow.